Kia ora everyone, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for joining us this afternoon or rejoining us for those who have been with us beforehand. Me karakia tātou, tui ai runga, tui ai raro, ka rongo te pō, ka rongo te ao, I te kōrero, I te wānanga, tūturu o whiti, whakamaua kia tīna, haumie, huie, tai ki e. Tēnā tātou katoa. So, welcome back and welcome if you haven't been in our seminar series before. It's brought to you by He Waka Noa, Māori Cultural Frameworks for Violence Prevention and Intervention. This is part of a huge project led by Professor Leonie Pihama. And as part of that, we have been running this webinar series through Ngā Waiata Tui at Unitec. So this afternoon, we're very fortunate to have a wonderful speaker. I know many of you will be here because you've heard of her, and some of you will have actually heard from her directly. But Professor Bonnie Duran is just hugely well known. We're really privileged to have her with us this afternoon in New Zealand. She's a professor in the schools of social work and public health at the University of Washington in Seattle. She's been working for more than 35 years in public health and social care research. She's well known in the sort of Indigenous psychology area, the public health area, and community participatory research area. And we're lucky because she's part of our research project as well. And we've spent many wonderful times with Bonnie, and I think you will all find her really engaging speaker, and I know she's got an awesome PowerPoint for us to listen to and read this afternoon. So we'll have Bonnie talk. Please put your questions in the Q&A. If you want to chat, that's in the chat box, but if you've got questions, and we'll do that at the end of her talk. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Bonnie, and you can begin to share your screen.
Okay, thank you so much, Linda. Those were all wonderful things that you said about me. And I think that, you know, half of the stuff I know I learned from you guys. So you guys are also just an eminent source of Indigenous well-being and reflexivity, and I am so delighted to be working with you. I have to go and start this slideshow. Oops. Oh, I guess I did it. So today I'm just going to talk about settler colonialism, which is something that here in the US and in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have all been through. And it really is the source of a lot of structural sources of inequities, health inequities and economic inequities, and a lot of inequities. So I want to talk about that. So first of all, you know, right now, the younger generation taught us all about intersectionality. That and you know, we knew it, but we didn't have that word for it, and that just means that there's no such thing as knowledge production that doesn't come from a worldly social location. I'm a mixed race Obalus and Kushada person, also Latinx, African American, other minoritized communities. I'm a first generation college student. I went to UC Berkeley. I was very lucky. I'm a product of the civil rights and women's movement for sure. I grew up professionally in urban Indian clinics and started working with tribes very early on in my academic career. Some of my specialties are community-based participatory research, and that's only because I just wanted to work with people who looked like me. So I was working in Indian country, and then they made a fancy name for it. I also do alcohol, drug, and mental disorders epidemiology and interventions in Indian country. And I'm also actually a Buddhist minister. I actually teach mindfulness from definitely an indigenous lens. So I'm going to talk about settler colonialism, intergenerational trauma, mechanisms for research and cultural practices, and overcoming historical trauma. Just very briefly, we all probably know about the history of Western modernity coloniality, but actually, modernity was built partly for the purpose of colonialism, and all of the theory that is behind it really supports our Western European relatives traveling around the world and claiming that they are the only way to develop knowledge, and claiming land and labor as a form of, essentially a form of oppression, but actually tying it back to Western philosophy. Um, Deontological ethics and teleological ethics. That means whatever good results that you want, whatever you do to get there is okay. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing that around the world. We're seeing that in the United States. We're seeing that in Russia, crazy stuff. The colonial matrix of power, very, very briefly, control of the economy, land appropriation, making Native people invisible, labor exploitation of Black and African descent people, and control of natural resources, control of authority, control of gender and sexuality. One of the things that made Indigenous people in North America seem genetically and culturally inferior to our Western relatives who invaders was that we had a gender spectrum back in the 1490s. I'm so happy to always to say that. And then control of subjectivity and knowledge. Hopefully that's changing right now. We have to decolonize higher education. So, what are the assumptions of the Western scientific method? Western values and culture are universal and the pinnacle of social evolution. Science is neutral, subjectivity is universal and transparent. If any group of people don't want to work with Western scientists or Western culture, it's because we're too ignorant to realize the purpose of that, and that learning is only one way from the West to the rest. That are some of the underlying assumptions of that. What are the origins of the medical industrial complex? That's what we call it here in the US now, the medical industrial complex. This is an example of just a cultural genocide, that actually was a proponent of Western medicine. Actually, a lot of early physicians out on so-called reservations or native nations were physicians and ministers, and actually wanted to Christianize a lot of people. And look at the science, it is just so terrible. I mean, the chair of the Navajo Nation Institutional Review Board, she was the founder and chair. She asked me to find some articles, historical articles about Dene Navajo, so she could show Western scientists why they needed to do their own scientific review. And you can just see how crazy this is. I mean, I've got about 300 of these articles, and I'm sure that there's a lot more. Anyone doing research with historically marginalized or minoritized people, you should look to see what were the original scientific articles about them, and you'll see why people are so skeptical. I mean, look at this, and as you can imagine, the whitest people were the most intelligent people, right? And this is what science did. It, justified settler colonialism and land appropriation, labor exploitation, and oppression. That's what one of its jobs was. I like this cartoon. Yeah, back in 2000 BC, here, eat this root. The West said, no, that's just too primitive. And now in 2022, it's here, eat this root. And they have discovered the complex, interwoven, connected nature, connectedness of nature and all of life. Yes. So what are some alternatives to that? What are some alternative epistemologies for knowledge development and for healing? I want to talk about healing. I love QR codes. I love free stuff. So, I have already sent this presentation. Anybody can have this presentation, but you all know how to use QR codes, right? You just point your phone, open your camera, and if you point to those QR codes there, it'll take you to a place that you can download that article. Those articles. And those are very brief overview articles of some pretty heavy theoretical approaches, but they're really excellent. And we know what the originals of this were. Linda Smith's decolonizing methodologies was one of the most important books to come out, one of the most important approaches, and it impacted all Indigenous people across the world. And I just saw, Linda, that the third edition is coming out. I'm going to have to figure out how to get a copy of that. And then the book that you did with Eve Tuck, and Eve Tuck is one of our incredibly brilliant faculty here in the U.S. And, other people have looked at the effect of colonization and settler colonialism. Pretty much everyone doing this type of research is saying that cultural trauma places and colonial places as well. And, some of the fanciest researchers are coming out now and talking about how coloniality is still central to how a lot of people talk about global health and global well-being. And, they're really trying to change things. Here's our wonderful colleague, Sister Karina Walters, did this wonderful History Through a Native Lens at Native Philanthropy. You could take a look at that. She goes back to pre-colonial times and talks about just the incredible advances Indigenous people had before colonization. Here is a wonderful book, but it's pretty dense. It's about epistemologies of the South. And, those of us Indigenous people are a part of the global South, even though we might live in countries out of the global North, because we are minoritized and oppressed within those systems, very much still. I'm sure you heard that there's so much white supremacy happening now. People are getting killed, and African descent people are getting killed in grocery stores. It's crazy what's going on here. And the principle of this is that the understanding of the world is much broader than the Western understanding of the world. There's no global social justice without cognitive justice. Understanding how different people create knowledge and use knowledge, and that is so important. This is one of my favorite underlying theoretical approaches to community engagement. Miranda Fricker, she is a feminist psychologist, a feminist philosopher, and hermeneutical injustice is huge. And that is that, people who don't have the space to do their own meaning making, and having someone else tell them, this is what's wrong with you. For example, having the DSM-5 and having, all telling everyone who has this disorder or that disorder or mental health, and, this is what's wrong with you. And it's due to genetic and cultural inferiority. But actually, hermeneutical injustice is beautiful. Do you know that it's a beautiful concept? Do you know, how long has sexual harassment been happening? Since the dawn of humanity, right? It only became, that word was invented, sexual harassment, only 25 years ago. And hermeneutical justice was a huge part of understanding intergenerational historical trauma. Back in the 1980s in the United States, Samson Hearst, federal government organizations were giving out a lot of conference money. So Native people, community health workers, community social workers, educators would get together for regional events, 3, 4, 5 times a year. And over 5 or 6 years, everyone would say, well, what's going on in your place? This is what's happening in my place. And, the term historical trauma emerged as a theory of why there are so many health and social disparities. Before, the underlying theory is that Indigenous people are genetically and culturally inferior. And we said, heck no, that's not why. That's not an appropriate theory of etiology. The theory of etiology is that we were subject to 400, 500 years of settler colonialism. And that's why we have so many health disparities. So when it first came out, the question is that true? Is historical trauma true? I remember even some very high standing Native scholars said, oh, that's just what Native people are saying, it's a folk tale. But guess what? They came up with epigenetics and actually had a biological and genetic pathway towards vulnerability for people who experienced historical trauma or colonization in previous generations. Even one generation or 5 or 6 generations absolutely makes people much more vulnerable to social conditions than if you didn't have that. So allostatic load and epigenetics absolutely proves the theory of historical trauma. What are the present day outcomes? Socioeconomic status is divided along color lines, physiological physiological effects of bias and discrimination. Um, so what they call it is the weathering effect. Having so much allostatic load in our systems produces the weathering effect and life course effect, and really impacts our vulnerability to diabetes and mental health issues and heart disease and other chronic conditions. So it's a real thing. So I love this guy, Tommy Lee Woon. Here's another QR code. You could download his work. It is so good. He talks about what the effects of prejudice, discrimination, and inequality in the body. For people who don't have a lot of allostatic load or stress response, what happens is you're at Rex, you're relaxed, you're at ease. You get a stress or a threat, you get oriented to a stress. You go into the two stress responses, fight or flight or freeze or dissociation. But then because you have enough resources, you're able to let go and discharge this stress, and you go back to relaxation and ease. So people can, let go of a lot of stress. Their stress response is a lot shorter. But traumatic symptoms, dysregulation of the anatomic nervous system because of historical and present day trauma, you get stuck in fight or flight, and I'm sure that we have seen that where we might say something very little, make a small mistake, and people will jump at us like we just, created something terrible. That is a fight or flight response to a little bit of a triggering. Or you go into the freezer dissociation. And I've done this, having people within the academy just treat me so badly that I will freeze and dissociate and say, hey, I'm not hanging around with you anymore. I'm sure all of us have some memories and some examples of how this works. And if we don't have resources, we get stuck in freeze and dissociation. So now I want to talk about some ways that we can bring mental resources to toxic stress. Toxic stress impairs our mental resources, and how we can actually work with that in a good way. So one thing is a negativity bias. It's a physiological, anatomical response that we have, is that we overscan for bad news. We're always looking for the saber-toothed tiger in the bushes. It is a response that we have that we should just be aware of, because it really keeps us noticing the negative a lot more than the positive. So I want to talk about our fundamental needs, which are safety. This is all humans' fundamental needs from one perspective, not the only perspective, absolutely, but one perspective. We need safety, we need satisfaction, and we need connection. So what are some resources for safety? Self-compassion is a huge one. And I know many of us, I grew up in a house where I, was responsible for a lot of caretaking, and, I didn't put myself first very much. And I think a lot of us do that. We're always trying to take care of other people, the younger people, the older people. My partner right now just got a cast off. He broke his leg, and he's having some other aging issues that, a lot of caretaking there. But what we need to do is to bring that compassion to ourselves. And we need to train our mind to do that. It's not about us making a decision in the moment. It's about what mental factors are strongest in us, and self-care and compassion. We can strengthen those mental factors. So we get a sense of being cared for in the world. We bring our mind to that. Let's all do it. Who loves us right now? I'm thinking I got a COVID dog. My COVID dog loves me, boy. As soon as I come into the house, he's always jumping on me, and he just loves me. So we can bring to mind beings who care about us. We can focus on that feeling of being cared about. Beings that we have compassion for. Just think of all the people that we are, saying, doing ceremony for and offering merit and prayers for, and then receive that compassion for ourselves. Put ourselves at the center of that warmth and love, and thinking about all of our burdens and stress, and making them really visible to us, and get a sense of caring, warmth, and support from those around us and from ourselves. This is one really new thing that I want to make sure that you all hear about. I know a lot of us work with people who are suffering deeply, and this was actually a very ancient 2,600-year-old epistemology from the global south that I think is so good. And that is, when you are caring about people who are suffering, if you want to know more about suffering, you should think about what they're suffering from. But I think all of us probably have our fill of knowing about suffering and having experienced suffering. So rather than to focus on why they're in a lot of pain, what we can focus on is our compassion for them. Hold them in an energetic field of, I care deeply for your suffering. May you be free from pain and suffering. May you be happy. And just really concentrate on that. And actually, compassion feels good, and it creates an energetic field that we can hold people much longer than if we really did focus on their suffering. So focusing on compassion is really an excellent way to deal with that. And that QR code goes to the book that this is in. Actually, the first chapter is about compassion. So, you could just read the first chapter. It's really good about how to hold all of our relatives who are suffering in compassion and love. And then resources for satisfaction. So developing inner strengths, when we can respond to a situation intuitively with strengths and with very positive emotions, that is a source of a lot of strength and connection for us. Here is Lakota, Dakota. My sister teaches in the social work program at Sitting Bull College on the Standing Rock Reservation. And she sent me this. I just thought it was so beautiful. These are the core values that they're teaching Lakota, Dakota students at the tribal college there. And they're very, very much like the Buddhist paramis. There's 10 paramis, and there's 10 wonderful characteristics that they're teaching the kids too. And that's a wonderful book about how you can strengthen the things like respect and generosity and compassion and integrity, ethics and patience and honesty. That book tells you how to work with your heart mind to strengthen those mental factors. So that's what arises when you're responding to stress or anything else. And one way is through heal, activation, have a beneficial experience, enrich the experience, absorb the experience, and link positive and negative experiences. This is one way to describe mindfulness, essentially, is just be present for the now, right now. And then resources for connection. That's one wonderful thing about our Indigenous communities. We have these wonderful ceremonies. I loved visiting Ataroa because you couldn't go to a new meeting or to a new building without having the start of a ceremony when people would welcome you there. It was so beautiful. Such a feeling of connection and community. And, here in the US, we also have sweat lodges. Actually, we have an American Indian Indigenous Research Center at our school. And, Karina Walters, our beloved sister, does sweat lodges once a month for everyone, dancing, singing, Humblecha Vision Quest, Sundance, drumming, meditation retreats. Yes. I'm actually teaching Indigenous retreats now called Retreat is Ceremony. All of the big centers, that's all they want me to do is to teach Indigenous people. Look at these beautiful posters that came out because of COVID. Don't you love it vaccination. Be a good ancestor. Aren't they beautiful? Yeah, they're so good. If you want a link to those, there's like a whole bunch more at the United Indian Health Institute here in Seattle. They are a resource for all urban Indian health issues, and they did an excellent job of putting together things for COVID vaccination and for mask wearing and things like that. Another point of connection is forgiveness. We can even forgive the invaders, the settlers, and we can decide whether we want to renew a relationship with them or not. But letting go of that hurt and pain and anger really helps us develop a more positive mental factors for us too. Oh, so I want to talk about mindfulness as an epistemology of the global South. It has been, commodified by the medical industrial complex, but there is, we call ourselves the convert community, the convert Buddhist community. And, we haven't commodified it. I teach mindfulness for Donna, which means just for whatever people want to donate. And here is one resource. I've developed a whole bunch of pages with links to URLs with free mindfulness resources. Don't ever pay for it. And actually, so there's a lot of good free resources. It's an epistemology of the global South. It's 2,600 years old. I mean, this is a very old system. And, one thing I want to point out is that we have two knowledge systems. We have our conceptual mind. We count things, we name things, we have ideas, and we make up the world with that conceptual knowledge system. But we also have another knowledge system, our wisdom knowledge system, intuitive knowledge system. And mindfulness collects the data of the regular world, and it creates compost and for our wisdom knowledge system, and we'll have an insight. I'm sure all of us can remember having an insight about something that really changed the way we were in the world. And that's the knowledge system that mindfulness really deals with. And you ask, is mindfulness, is it effective? This article came out within the last year. Nature Human Behavior is one of the highest regarded scientific journals ever. And look, they combined 419 randomized controlled trials, and look what they found out. That this 2,600-year-old approach was the most effective of any mental disorder. And you can download that article and that QR code. That blew my mind. So what is mindfulness? It's having some objectivity in your mind heart so you don't get obsessed or indulgence or privilege any particular thought or emotion, but you also don't deny it, repress it, or are intolerant of it. And this guy is considered to be the best scholar right now. And you can download his book on this. It's probably the best book out right now about how to do it. It's number 28 at that QR code. And you can download his guided meditations here. And one meditation, the number 2 meditation in that link is the 4 elements meditation. And, when I heard that, I was blown away because I've never been to an Indigenous ceremony that didn't somehow have the 4 elements as central to it. And, what it does is this particular meditation scans our body from the top of our head down to our toes for the 4 elements. First, we scan for earth element, and then for water element, come back up, water element, go back down for fire element, which is temperature, and then back up for air element, which is the breath. And, that makes us understand, not conceptually. I mean, we can understand it conceptually, but that helps us have an insight about how, guess what? We are absolutely nature. And, all of these 4-legged and winged ones and finned ones, and even the creepy crawlers are our relatives. And these are all of our, we're just part of the overall nature. So you can download that book. And practicing this way, practicing with this builds our concentration. It provides sensory clarity. So it lets us see clearly these, really wholesome thoughts and emotions we have, and all of the incredible crazy thoughts and emotions that will arise in response to stress and problems in our life. And it creates equanimity, the ability to be with experience with an attitude of gentleness and openness and acceptance, and not have to have things be your way. Here's one of the core elements of mindfulness: is when something is happening and you're struggling, just say, okay, I'm going to reign right now. I have to recognize what's happening. I'm going to accept and allow this. Investigate, how does this feel energetically? What are the thoughts that I'm having? What does it want me to do? And then realize that you are one of 50 million other people in the world who are feeling that right now. That's not a real personal thing, that's a manifestation of our nature, and we don't have to take it so personally. uh, and here, I actually have this QR code, the number 2, and that downloadable. All of those guided meditations are downloadable. So earth element, scanning the body for heaviness. Let's do it just for a second. Let's feel our overall body. Let's feel our body from our head to our toes. Can we feel the earth element? Our bones are earth element, hardness and density. Even our skin is earth element. Thank you, earth, air, or wind element. Where do we feel that? Our lungs are expanding and contracting just all the time. That is air element. Water element, all the blood and mucus and all the wet, slimy stuff is part of water element. And we can feel that in our bellies, in our mouths. We know that there's blood all over our bodies. Sweat, saliva, urine. And then fire element is temperature. You can feel our warmth. It's about 60 degrees in Seattle, Washington right now, which is where I'm at. The sun is out, so there is some fire element out. But, just doing these meditations definitely connects us so closely to nature, which is a really wonderful place to actually de-stress and to get some resources for living well in the world. There's another type of meditation called loving kindness or divine abodes, and that just tells us to love ourselves first. There's no other person that deserves your love more than you. No one deserves your love less than you, but they don't deserve it any more than you either. And we have to love ourselves fiercely. If we don't love ourselves, what we're offering to other people might be less than real love and could be, something not as wholesome. We should, take care of ourselves, voice our love, and let go of our guilt and all of our bad emotions. Here are, mantras that actually create samadhi or strength in meditation practice. And you can make these up just based on whatever ceremony that you're doing. There's metta, loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy. Usually we can't help it, but when something happens to our friends, we get a little flash of jealousy or something. We can actually be incredibly happy for everyone who has good fortune if we have sympathetic joy. And then equanimity is one of the highest spiritual qualities in all spiritual traditions. And there's a way for us to just strengthen that and make that be what arises in our intention when we're walking around in the world. And, so I'm part of a monthly group here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States that meets with a teacher in Ataroa monthly. Willa Tania Reed and her partner, they actually live in Waikato, and they have a retreat center. That's a URL to their retreat center. And oh my gosh, she taught me this one meditation that I'll tell you right now. So for those of you who have pets, who have puppies, dogs, or kittens, just imagine that your in breath and your out breath is petting your heart the way that you pet your dog. Just try it for a second. And just maybe a slight word. May I be happy, safe, healthy. And imagine that you're petting your heart with your breath the way that you pet your puppy. I love that meditation. Yeah, I get to meet with them monthly. They're just so wonderful. So that's all I have. Linda, do you have a dog?
No, I don't have a dog or a cat, but I
No.
still did that exercise.
Yeah.
I just imagined I had a cat.
Yeah, that's good.
But thank you very much, Bonnie. That was like a whirlwind of multiple things for us to think about. And I just thought it was wonderful in the sense of helping all of us to remember to take care of ourselves.
Yes.
So for many in the audience, they work in these spaces of family violence, working in the health sector. So it's really important, and I think that's one of your messages, is that all of us, take care of ourselves so we can take care of others.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed that. So I'm just filling up space here while people type their questions. But we did have one about just a simple one, really, which is about the articles that you used, wanting the sort of full reference. But did you put that in the QR code?
Yeah. Well,
Articles?
what you do is you take, so I sent you the PowerPoint, right? And
Yeah.
please feel free to give that to whoever wants it. And what you can do is just take your phone camera and point it at the QR code, and it'll take you to the URL, to the website where you can download those books. I mean, some of those are books that you're able to download for free, and for the articles that you could download for free. I
Yeah.
think the articles are great because they're very short overviews, summaries of the very dense,
Yeah.
that stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that. That will be great. So I think what Ruth has said is some of those QRs aren't opening, but when we get the
Oh, they're not?
PowerPoint, yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it might be because we're using it in the webinar context as opposed to the straight PowerPoint. I don't know, but this webinar does get released to the participants in a couple of days. So they'll be able to see the webinar again with the PowerPoint. And then I'll leave it to Bernadette to think about how to send forward the PowerPoint directly to people. Okay, so we've got things coming up in the chat. And just shortcuts to mindfulness. Can you read the chats, Bonnie? They're kind of coming thick and fast.
Yes. Yeah, definitely need the PowerPoint. I might actually be able to put a PDF of it because I just put two of the articles I mentioned into the chat. So you should be able to download those. Yeah.
So one question is, kia ora koutou, great to hear and see you, Bonnie. My pātaia questions. Any shortcuts to this mindfulness, or is mindfulness the quick fix?
I think that even just beginning to practice it can be very, very helpful. And then the deeper you get in, the more wisdom you get, and you get, big insights. I mean, I saw that someone said, of course we are nature, but, we can have a conceptual understanding of that. And then we can actually have an insight about that. And, something that Indigenous people have been saying forever. Didn't you like that cartoon where the guy is saying, oh, they're saying now that everything is interconnected and interwoven. And
Well, and
And
the thing is, the more you go into something, the deeper it gets, and the more it sits with you, and the more you
yes,
can,
exactly.
you know, develop it.
Yeah.
So I've got a
And
question.
I sent you that thing that Brown University in the United States now is doing a free BIPOC mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is definitely a little bit of the commodified form, but it's an excellent beginning. So you
Okay,
might,
yeah,
yeah, you should call Brown University and tell them they need to do that just in Aotearoa. That would be really cool.
I should. I know. Yeah, I've been there to Brown. Anyway, we've got a question from Leonie. How do you use these approaches with people who are experiencing deep trauma?
Well, um, I invite everybody on retreat, and I've been giving, Indigenous retreats. And now, there's two big centers for mindfulness in the United States. One is called the Insight Meditation Society that opened in the 1979 or something. And the other one is Spirit Rock, Jack Cornfield and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg. And now they just want me to do Indigenous retreats because they want this to be available to Indigenous people. And what happens is, it's a somatic body-based relief. So you might have a week of sobbing meditation and a week of stomping meditation,
Mm.
and that is part of the trauma release, and that's good for us. And sometimes we don't even know why we're sobbing. We just know that we're letting go of body-based trauma. Yeah.
Mm. And I guess that leads to a question. And if we broaden it out to the Indigenous retreats, how are those retreats different from non-Indigenous retreats?
um there's a little bit more interaction, and you know actually I have other Indigenous people teach it with me. And we actually Spirit Rock is the biggest centers, right? And it's been there for 30 years. And just when I started teaching there, I invited the Miwok elders, the elders from the Indigenous community, and now they're coming around a lot. And everyone is loving having them there. And they come in and talk about what, Miwok ceremony and philosophy and spirituality is. And it sounds, there's so much similarities to what's being taught at Spirit Rock. It's absolutely amazing. And people are feeling better about being there, that they're not, they're doing reparations in a way, right? These places are doing reparations and letting go of some of the guilt that they have for taking advantage of settler colonialism. So
Mm.
they're basically the same. We go into deep practice, but we also are able to hold people who we know are doing trauma release.
Mm. Yeah, and one of the questions here was, is there specific sort of approach on how we introduce or talk mindfulness to our Māori whānau? I don't know who's doing mindfulness with whānau in Māori cultural contexts, but you've just given us a little example of the use of ceremony, the things we're used to, but then
Yeah.
going into this sort of deep mindfulness practice and letting go or experiencing it as a physical thing.
Yeah.
And
And I got to tell you, Willa Reed, I know she's not Indigenous for sure, but she is a very wise and deep person, and she has ultimate respect for Maori people. I know that she's talked about her, deep level of respect. So, I would think that if you reached out to her, she and her partner would probably be more than happy to be of help. Yeah.
there's a question here from Angela. Do some of the mindfulness exercises which have a somatic approach include vagus nerve relaxing specifically?
I don't really know that much about physiology to be able to answer that, but I'll tell you that when I was in my teacher training for teaching mindfulness retreats, in the US, because I wasn't a psychologist and didn't have a lot of that, I actually had to take the first couple of years of somatic experiencing training, which many of you probably know is a form of psychotherapy now, right? I don't know if it's psychotherapy, maybe it's body therapy, but it's just really finding where trauma and is trapped in the body and working with it to let it go. So
Mm.
yeah, that is definitely a part of mindfulness practice for sure. Because what happens is when we have all of that trauma and that those things stuck in us, that it impacts our perception. We see things as a lot more dangerous, or maybe more beautiful or more ugly. It really impacts our ability to see clearly. That's why we want to really let go of all of that, because if we have a lot of trauma, we're not seeing very clearly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of your early slides kind of talked about the way, that we can be wired in a sense to the negative, to the, we're programmed to read the negative rather than, flip it to thinking about compassion or forgiveness or these positive feelings that produce positivity.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's what, our communities historically were built on. There's three insights when you do this practice. And to me, they're insights that people have been telling me about my whole life, the Native community. And those are that nothing in the conditioned world will ever be ultimately satisfying, right? So, 3 minutes weightlessness in space is not going to make you not want anything else, right? There's nothing that you can get that'll be so satisfying. The second is that things are changing all the time. And the third is the biggest one, which is a foundation of Indigenous communities, and that is we are deeply interconnected. We are all relatives. I mean, when I only work in Indian country here in the US, and my emails are always start with dear relatives. Even our enemies are our relatives, and they just don't even realize how they are creating karma for themselves and others. They're just ignorant and don't realize our all of our interconnectedness. Yeah.
Okay, so your last chance, everybody, for questions before we close off. Oh, here we are. But it's a question for me. Would you recommend somatic experience in here in Aotearoa? I find this very effective to some in the culture. I think it's that holistic thing that really works for us. And you see it in the way Māori do things together anyway. There's always physical, cultural, spiritual, kind of emotional, those concepts, I think, are present naturally in many of our ceremonies. And the best example is probably tangihanga, our funeral ceremonies. They have all these different components that helps the grieving process. So that would be a short answer. But now the questions are coming thick and fast. Bonnie, how do Indigenous ways of engaging in spiritual mindfulness meditation practices such as prayer and ceremony mesh with the commodified mainstream mindfulness practices we see? Is there a tension? Māori mindfulness is my main research theme, so this is interesting for me. That's from Johnny.
Yep. Well, I think that actually something that you once said, Linda, sticks with me. And that is that it's not the methodologies that are bad. So it's not necessarily Western research methods that are bad. It's the unconscious bias of the people who are using them. And I would say that that's true of that, we don't have to have and I'm within the spiritual Buddhist community. I mean, I don't charge for teaching mindfulness. All of the trainings and retreats that we do are for Dana only, which means we accept what what anybody has to offer. And we just started one of our advanced programs. It's called the Dedicated Practitioners Program, and it's 95 people, 5 retreats over 2.5 years, and a third of the people are BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, a third are LGBTQ, and a third are mainstream. And we have a lot of scholarships for people because it can be expensive, but we tell people who are coming in, when you give Dana, remember that you're not just giving Dana for yourself, you're also supplying this resource for people in our community that can't afford it. And that's a huge benefit. Karma, I mean, that's some of the best karma, providing teachings for people. It's huge. Yeah. So I think that we can do it and bring it in and not commodify it. I mean, I should tell you, I taught a retreat once with John Kabat-Zinn. And did I tell you that story?
No.
Did I tell you? So
Yeah.
first I want to say that I really like him now. But what happened was he and that monk Analio, that German monk, were teaching a retreat together, and me and another senior woman were like their assistants, because they don't like to meet with yogis or meet with the retreatants. They don't like to meet with the people to make sure that they're okay. So we were kind of doing the grunt work, but that's fine because I'm in charge in so many areas of my life. I'm happy not to be in charge a lot. So but somebody asked him, there's no ethics in MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's supposed to be, and when mindfulness is from a spiritual tradition, it has to be done by people with ethics, because if you don't have ethics, then you're not going to benefit from the practice at all. And he said, well, MBSR is done in the medical community, and everybody in the medical community takes the Hippocratic Oath, so we don't need to do that. And the whole room just rolled their eyes. And all of us people of color, you saw what medicine was doing to Indigenous people back in the day. And so he asked the monk, what do you think of MBSR? Don't you think it's great? And the monk didn't answer. He refused to answer. And then one of the 100 people on the retreat raised their hand and said, why don't you ask the women? And so he asked the other woman, Sally, and she said, I think it could bring people to the Dharma. And then he asked me, and I said, John, I don't want to answer that question. And he said, no, Bonnie, you have to answer that. MBSR is dialogical. That was a wrong thing to say to me. And I said, we have a name for that, John. It's called emotional labor. It's when people of privilege ask,
Yes.
marginalized people to explain our oppression to them, and they'll take it in with a default skepticism. So no, I'm not going to tell you why I don't think the medical industrial complex is an ethical place. No, I'm not going to tell you what I think. And you can imagine, there was 60 notes on the board within a half an hour. 40 of them said, thank you so much for standing up to patriarchy. And 20 of them said, you should never be allowed to teach her again, because this was at IMS, the big center. But then exactly a year later, I got one of the best emails I've ever gotten from John Kabat-Zinn that said, I just want to thank you for your heroic truth telling, because ever since that happened, I have been so much more in touch with my privilege and just what's happening within the medical establishment. So I bow to you. Thank you for doing that. So now that was one of the, so now I like him.
He took a long time to get insight, though.
I know, but yeah, that was good. Yeah. He was leaving that retreat to go teach mindfulness to the owners of Alibaba. I was shocked. Isn't that crazy? The West is teaching, certain Asian commodified cultures, their Asian, roots. It's so weird sometimes.
And that's a kind of funny place to end. It is weird sometimes. But I think, Bonnie, I just want to thank you for always your joy in talking to us, and always your kind of multiple layers in which you educate and communicate the things that you are really passionate about. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I don't know, what time is it for you over there?
It is 7:27 p.m. And I just want to thank you. I mean, I'm going to smudge myself on all of you right now because I feel like I am in excellent holy company. Thank you
Well,
so much.
we always love having you and enjoy the short moments that we have, and hopefully one day soon we get to see each other in person. But in the meantime, one of the gifts of Zoom is that it has brought you to us, and that for at least 1 hour we've had the joy of your company. So on behalf of all the participants, thank you so much, Bonnie, and for those, also for the participants, some of you will know this, our session has been recorded and it will get released in a few days' time. So I'll just say our final karakia for the afternoon, and we can finish our session. So kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou, ariki a ihu kraiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, ake, amene. Kia ora, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for being with us, and bye-bye, Bonnie.
Bye.
Oh, there's Leonie.
Leonie. Bye.
Thank you, Bonnie. Ka kite.
Loved hanging around with you guys. Bye.
Yeah.